food over the years and over the centuries has changed, but changed very little. And yet it seems it's changed a lot. So what does food mean to you? Or what does food mean to me? When I think of food, I think straight up aspiration. Of course, now, most people will think that it's sustenance and it's survival, but food has been as much about aspiration through history and now uh, as anything else. Fashion too is similar, right? And I break fashion down into two things, two very broad sort of categories. So I'll use two terms: haute, which could mean expensive, excessive, fancy, and hot, which I will, for my own benefit, categorize as something which is a little more pervasive, um, easily accessible, and possibly more mass market than what oat is. So we have two sides of the spectrum. We have oat and we have hot. And that's how I'm going to divide food up for you as well. Through history, if you look at the Byzantine Empire, you look at the Egyptians, you look at the Mughals, you look at almost any civilization, if you look at city-states, the celebration around food was always about excesses. It was never about frugality, right? Frugality was only for the have-nots. Cuisine, as it turned out, was actually driven from the top and not so much from the bottom. So during the Industrial Revolution, when processes got more streamlined, there was mass production of things, there was assembly lines, all the expensive, exotic ingredients, which was oat, became available to a much larger mass of people. So if you look at Europe, where surprisingly at that time, both dairy and meat were actually quite scant. You didn't get them as easily as you get them today. That changed. And whatever was in the realm of the rich moved down, right? It moved down the line. And it became accessible to everybody else and an integral part of their diets. So this whole cheese manufacturing and everything that you associate with these cuisines, the European cuisines, didn't even exist. That happened much later. Haute cuisine, which we still, a lot of our chefs, we use that as a benchmark for whatever we do. These were the strongest foundations that were ever set. And that codification is what resulted in the pushing of technique over only ingredient, right? And that's why I call it codification. It became apparent that to generate excitement for the wealthy lot, of course, in big cities at that time like London and Paris and New York, was to take the most ubiquitous of things and make them exciting through presentations, through techniques, and taking the same concept and adding excitement to it through skill. And that's precisely what chefs do with food and make it fashionable. Skill and aesthetics come into play together to make sure that you've elevated the most simple of things. I'll give you a very interesting example of how the reverse also happened, right? Now we've reached a point where there's a lot more people in the world, and everyone's looking at the next big thing in food. And yet, some of the most aspirational things today, as recently as the 60s, were considered garbage food. Classic example is tuna, right? A lot of people eat sushi, and tuna is probably some of the most expensive sushi you can get anywhere in the world. But up until the 60s, the Japanese considered bluefin tuna, which is one of the most expensive forms of tuna, sports fish and fish that was only fit for cat food. The term they had for tuna was called neto matagi. Neto matagi means food that's not fit for cats. So food that's not fit for cats was made into cat food by the Japanese. On the other side of the world, the Americans were just canning it and using it for sandwiches. But tuna, nobody would have considered eating raw. So what happened? Of course, when you have something which is landing up as sports fish, the prices drop. It's rubbish. There's no value to it. So some smart chefs basically rode on that and trying to save costs and took slices of really fatty bluefin tuna belly, cut it into really thin slices, and sold it on the street side and called it nigiri. And that essentially is how tuna became popular. Within 15 years, that trend caught on. And caught on how? And now from Belize to Bangalore, everybody knows the difference between a chew toro and a no toro, because good tuna is now very hard to find. So the average bluefin tuna goes for about 25 lakhs of fish, and the record set for one specimen was 14 crores for one fish. This is the same fish which in the 60s was garbage. Hot becomes oat. Now the trend starts changing, right? Because why? There's just too much happening. And we have to keep up with the fashion. We have to keep up with the fashion of food. And sometimes to keep up with the fashion of food, you don't look upwards, you look downwards. And that's when the entire thing flips over. Post that, there was another movement called the modernist movement, or a lot of you probably recognize it as molecular gastronomy, which held strong for almost a decade. Now, this was again the refinement of the most simple and most distilled flavors and techniques. What was being applied to it was science. Did food fundamentally change? No. Did your perception of food change? Entirely. Amidst all this great change, there's one certainty that remains, that food like fashion will come full circle, but it keeps getting elevated. So even though it is a full circle, it's a bit of an upward spiral. And that's what's exciting about food for me, is that it keeps up with the times, but in essence, it doesn't change. So I'm going to do exactly the same dish through 4 different movements in history. Great. So I'm going to take you basically from the 30s to now in exactly the same dish. And I think that elucidates far better uh, how, in essence, food doesn't really change, but your perception of it does. And that's what's, I think, the height of fashion. So this is a chicken liver parfait or chicken liver pate, and this was probably how many people eat chicken liver parfait? I need to see a show of hands for this. Well, enough. How many of them eat crostinis, etc., etc.? Pretty much everyone, right? So this was a classical presentation in any Italian bistro or continental restaurant, if you were ever able to avoid one, which is highly unlikely. Um, so there was that. Can you see that? I don't know, I can't see behind me. Can you? No? Yes? Okay, great. And then, of course, this thing that everybody loved doing, right? But that's not half as irksome as this. So that plate is essentially a largely forgettable part of history. It carried on into the 80s and was mercifully forgotten across most of the world. But Indians and India has a tendency of carrying some trends for a much longer time. So you will still see that, but this is essentially the 40s to the 80s. Then we move on to this new genre, right? This new set. You've got the Gordon Ramsays, who are now, of course, much older, but they were working under people like Marco Pierre White. And these chefs came in to essentially clean up the mess. And how did they do that? Again, through skill and refinement. So we move on to the Marco Pierre White, where you needed to have a very steady hand, which I don't right now because I'm speaking. The kids in that audience saying, even I can do that. Food's easy, right? And you take the same pate and you give it a little more form. But it was still somewhat simple in its approach. What I liked about this era was that the purity and freshness was intact. There you go. So now we have the late 70s through the 80s and the early 90s sort of covered. Then we move into 2000 and beyond 2000, right? And of course, everything became a little fancier. So now what's the ingredients over here? Let me run you through that. I've got chicken liver parfait, I've got fresh herbs, I've got figs, and I've got toast. And that's a classic combination. So you've got something sweet and of course balsamic reduction. Oh yeah, sorry. A little more over here so you can see it. Right? Identical ingredients. Now we're getting very haute. If you don't have a smear, it's not cool enough. These are not gulab jamuns. That's chicken liver parfait, which, of course, we've used liquid nitrogen to freeze, and then we've used hydrocolloids, which are essentially modified starches of some form or the other, and we've taken cherries and figs and pureed them, and then we've dipped them so it coats, and it looks like a really big cherry. Can you see it? Does it look like a cherry? Really big one, huh? Oh, we're not done. Okay, just give me the toast, please. Oh, you can't play it unless you don't use. We do borrow from medical science as well. Chefs are a creative lot, you know. And toast. And of course, we need the greens. Oops. Oh, we're not done. What's missing? The balsamic's missing. Very good. Well, why put balsamic when you can put balsamic caviar, right? Is anything else missing? No, we pretty much got all of it. Yeah, but we have to make it a little fancier, so I carried a little more of that reduction. So we moved up the chain, identical. All the ingredients are identical. And now let's go a little extreme. Now, some of you might think I'm making a mockery of modernist cuisine. I'm not on camera at least. Now, this is when chefs go a little zen, right? Um, everything becomes about hyper local. Everything means, I mean, you should be able to basically open the back door and harvest half your vegetables. Um, it's a nice thought, but hard. But this would be a zen, ultra modernist, you know, supremely intellectual chicken liver parfait. And that's from free range chickens. I don't know why you're all laughing. This is the essence of herbs. It'll be a good looking plate, don't worry. Hand picked foliage. You can now understand why I'm unpopular in the community. Some kind of pollen. Oh, the fancy stuff. Oh, yes. Birchwood roasted grapes. It has to be birchwood. It changes the flavor completely. Toast dust. Edible charcoal. Uh, sorry. And freshly flamed pine. And that's part of my 20-course menu, where you can get chicken liver parfait in that form. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You have exactly the same food, uh, moving up the fashion chain. But in essence, it remains unchanged. Thank you very much.